Welcome back. I am your host, Jim Chapman, and today I am continuing 50 Shades of Evil, Washington, Ted Bundy. Now, when I left you last week, I detailed the capture of Ted Bundy in Pensacola, Florida, after murdering some 30 women across 5 states and escaping from jail twice. That's where we're going to pick up today with this final episode in the Ted Bundy saga, and the monster was finally in chains. What followed were two of the most bizarre, most televised, most psychologically disturbing trials in American legal history. Ted Bundy didn't just go to court. He turned the courtroom into his personal stage. A glittering arena where he could perform, manipulate, charm, and remind the entire world that even behind bars, he was still the one in control. And even before the trials, shortly after he was arrested, an indictment came out for the Florida State sorority house murders. And he, of course, would perform for those cameras. Now, I want you to picture this. The sheriff of Leon County, Florida, Ken Caceres, he's set to read that indictment to the media and also to Bundy. In front of news cameras in the county jail, he summons Bundy from his cell to read these charges to him publicly. Now, Bundy steps off the elevator where this wild exchange takes place in front of the whole world. News cameras everywhere, and I think it really paints a picture of the arrogance of Bundy. Listen to this.
What do we have here, Ken? Let's see. Oh, it's an indictment, all right. Why don't you read it to me? You're up for election, aren't you?
Mr. Bundy?
You got it, didn't you?
Mr. Bundy?
You told him that you were going to get me. He said he was going to get me, okay? You've got the indictment. It's all you're going to get. Let's read it. Let's go.
Theodore Robert Bundy, you are charged, indictment, 2 counts burglary and 2 counts murder in the first degree, 3 counts attempted murder in the first degree. In the name of and by the authority of the state of Florida, the grand jurors of the state of Florida impaneled and sworn to inquire and true presentment make in and for the county of Leon upon their oaths do present that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January 1978 in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully enter or remain in a structure located at 661 West Jefferson Street, the dwelling of Karen Chandler and or Kathy Kleiner with the intent to commit the offense of battery therein. In the course of committing such burglary, said Theodore Robert Bundy did make an assault upon Karen Chandler and or Kathy Kleiner, contrary to section 81002 Florida statutes.
Very good.
And your grand jurors being present in said court further gives the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January 1978 in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully kill a human being, to wit, Margaret Bowman, by strangling and or beating her, and said killing was perpetrated by said Theodore Robert Bundy from or with a premeditated design or intent to effect the death of said Margaret Bowman, contrary to section 78204 Florida statutes. And your grand jurors being present in said court further gives the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January 1978 in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully kill a human being, to wit, Lisa Levy, by strangling and or beating her, and said killing was perpetrated by said Theodore Robert Bundy from or with a premeditated design or intent to effect the death of said Lisa Levy.
My chance to talk to the press.
Contrary to section 78204 Florida statute.
I'll plead not guilty right now.
And your grand jurors being present in said court further gives the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully attempt to kill a human being, to wit, Karen Chandler, by beating her about the head and knowingly or intentionally causing great bodily harm, and said attempt was perpetrated by said Theodore Robert Bundy from or with a premeditated design or intent to effect the death of said Karen Chandler, contrary to section 77704, 7788204 Florida statutes. And your grand jurors being present in said court further give the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully attempt to kill a human being, to wit, Kathy Kleiner, by beating her about the head and knowingly or intentionally caused great bodily harm, and said attempt was perpetrated by said Theodore Robert Bundy from or with a premeditated design or intent to effect the death of said Kathy Kleiner, contrary to section 77704, 78204 Florida statute. And your grand jurors being present in said court further give the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully enter or remain in a structure located at 431A Dunwoody, the dwelling of Cheryl Thomas, with the intent to commit the offense of battery therein, and in the course of committing such burglary, the said Theodore Robert Bundy did make an assault upon Cheryl Thomas, contrary to section 81002 of Florida statutes. and your grand jurors being present in said court further give the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January 1978 in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully attempt to kill a human being, to wit, Cheryl Thomas, by beating her about the head and knowingly or intentionally causing great bodily harm, and said attempt was perpetrated by said Theodore Robert Bundy from or with a premeditated design or intent to effect the death of said Cheryl Thomas, contrary to Section 7704 and 78204 Florida statutes, contrary to the form of the statute in such case made and provided and against the peace and dignity of the state of Florida. That is the indictment handed down by the grand jury. This is the capias for your arrest for burglary of the dwelling, 2 counts, murder first degree, 2 counts, attempted murder first degree, 3 counts. I am commanded to keep you in safe custody and bring you before the spring term of the Circuit Court 1978 for the pending court of this county for those charges that I just read to you in case number 78-670, State of Florida versus Theodore Robert Bundy.
Is that my copy?
No, it is not.
Am I going to get a copy?
We have your copy. You have the copy.
I have a copy. How about the capias?
You'll get that.
I talked to the press. I mean, we've had our chance. We've displayed the prisoner now. I think it's my turn. Pardon me, which one?
I think that...
Well, listen. I've been kept in isolation for 6 months. I've been kept away from the press. I've been buried by you. You've been talking for 6 months. I think it's my turn now.
Okay.
All right?
We got a court order that there won't be any press interviews.
Sure, there won't be any press interviews. You've given them out. I'm gagged. You're not.
Okay. The Captain Binder will read your
I'll be heard.
Simply wild exchange between those two. Now, that first trial was for the Chi Omega sorority house murders, and it started on June 28th of 1979. It was a sweltering Miami courtroom that was packed to capacity. Reporters would jam shoulder to shoulder in the back rows, their notebooks open, television cameras would line the hallway outside, and the families of the victims would sit in the front rows. Mothers clutching crumpled tissues, fathers staring straight ahead with hollow eyes, and sisters and brothers trying not to break down every time the defendant's name was spoken. Margaret Bowman's mother sat rigid, her hands folded so tightly that it turned her knuckles white. Lisa Levy's parents held each other as if one of them may collapse if they let go. And there, at the defense table, sits Ted Bundy. He had insisted on representing himself. No high-powered attorney, just Theodore Robert Bundy, law student, former Republican volunteer, and the man that was accused of bludgeoning 2 women to death in their own beds. He wore a carefully chosen 3-piece suit. His hair was perfectly combed. His face was clean-shaven, and he looked exactly like the kind of young man any parent would want their daughter to bring home for dinner, honestly. He would smile at the jury, wink at the court transcriptionist, and he would stand up during the proceedings and pace the floor like a seasoned trial lawyer. He would gesture dramatically with his hands as if this were some elaborate debate club exercise instead of a murder trial for the most savage crimes that Florida had ever seen at this point, and that he had personally committed. His narcissism was on full, grotesque display from the very first day. He would cross-examine witnesses himself, leaning forward with a calm, educated voice, the same one that he used to lure these girls into his Volkswagen. He would object to evidence with flair. He would argue legal technicalities with the judge as though they were old college roommates. And at one point, he actually flirted openly with a female reporter sitting in the gallery. During breaks, he would chat casually in the courtroom with staff, crack small jokes, sign autographs for fans, and yes, he probably had more fans than any other serial killer in history. But Ted Bundy had one major problem. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Forensic experts would take the stand and describe the bite mark impressions left on Lisa Levy's breast and her buttocks, which really were the key to this entire case, and a major mistake that Bundy made because he left a deep bite impression on her that could be compared to his own bite impression, which This is so important for the prosecution that I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play you a clip now of the Leon County Sheriff discussing how they were able to obtain Bundy's bite impression. Listen to this.
Now, I focused on the bite marks because I knew they had potential, but they weren't used in court at the time. I had to figure a way to first preserve them. I worked with medical staff at the hospital, forensic individuals. I talked to a forensic odontologist about them. But then I knew I needed an exemplar. I needed his teeth marks. And that became, I think it consumed me. How can I get them? We tried everything in terms of, we knew that if we gave him an apple, for example, and he bit into it and left the core, we may have some impression, some bite that could be compared. It was interesting because he talked to the inmate in the cell next to him through a little vent. And he said, I wonder why they keep giving me different kinds of fruit. We gave him different kinds of fruit because we weren't sure which one the core would leave the best bite impression. And that inmate said, you're getting fruit? I don't get any fruit. And I think he became suspicious that something was going on with that because he quit eating his fruit. Governor Askew, who was the governor at the time, worked very closely with me. I went to his church on a Sunday morning after the crimes occurred. I waited for him outside. I said, Governor, I need your help. He put his arm around me and he said, Sheriff, what do you need? I said, I need you to just simply clear the way for me with the state lab. When I need something, I want you to help me get what I need. And he said, you just tell me what you need, I'll take care of it. So I was laying the groundwork politically, scientifically, legally, looking at how to do this. And then it struck us. It hit. What about a search warrant for his mouth? Well, no one had ever gotten a search warrant for somebody's mouth, but I thought, I teach search warrants. If we got a search warrant, we wouldn't have to tell him. We can just go serve it. That would get the bite impression. So I got Richard Souveron on board, who was the forensic odontologist, Dr. Souveron, out of Coral Gables, Florida. And I got my dentist on board, Emery Kane. I got my physician involved, and I determined now we're going to bring him to my dental office. And I personally went to Ted Bundy's cell and I said, and it was nighttime, I said, you're coming with me. All of a sudden, he had this fear that maybe I'd had my limit, I was going to take him out and perhaps eliminate him on my own. Of course, I would never do that. Justice served that way is improper justice. Obviously, I would be no better than him. But he wasn't sure. This was different. My attitude was different. He could tell. He was reluctant to come out of his cell. I told him to put his brace on. I had a special brace developed, now called the Bundy brace, that it took the place of having to worry about handcuffs because it didn't allow him to run. It locked in place and kept his legs stiff. And it was the first time a brace like this had ever been used in the country. It was spring-loaded so that when he would straighten out his leg, you could hear that spring pop into place, and it was locked. And, he couldn't take it off because it had a lock on it. And that way, if he tried to run, he'd be running with one stiff leg. I told him to put his brace on. He didn't want to, so he got out. He came with me. As we're entering the dental office from the back door, He starts laughing. And I said, "What's so funny?" He said, "I know why we're here." I said, "Why?" I didn't realize it, but there was a line of photographs up the stairway. And he thought that I brought him to a photography studio. He said, "You don't have a camera good enough to capture my image. You want a good picture of me." I said, "Oh yes, I want a good picture of you." And I escorted him up the stairway because he couldn't walk it very well with the brace. And then the door opened, and there sat three men with little white smocks on and the dental chair behind them. And he knew that was the moment that he came to grips with the signature. That's when I realized, yes, I was right. He started screaming for his attorney. He was shouting a name. He had 18 attorneys over a period of time. So it was one of those times when he actually had an attorney because he felt he was his own attorney. He was the best attorney for him because he thought he knew better than anyone else. He had 2 years of law school. So he felt like, I know. He had a degree in criminology, a minor in psychology. So now he's screaming for his attorney, just like he knew exactly what we were going to do. And then I told him, we're going to take a bite impression. And he said, "You can't do that." And I said, "I have a warrant." And I started reading the warrant. We read through the warrant for his mouth. And I had the judge put in there that we could use any and all force reasonably necessary to retrieve any evidence that is associated with this case from his mouth. And I showed him the contraptions that they use post-mortem to keep the mouth open when they have to do dental work, because they had brought those along. Dr. Suberon had those. And he looked at me. He sat down in the dental chair, smiled, and said, "Ken, you know I'm not a violent person. Do what you need to do."
So prosecutors would show the jury in this trial enlarged photographs of the wounds, the jagged edges of his incisors, the unique pattern of his dental arch. Hairs found in the stolen van were matched microscopically to fibers in the carpet of that sorority house. Bloodstains, shoe prints in the bloodstains. The testimony of the survivors alone was devastating. Carol DeRonch, the only woman who had ever fought her way out of his car alive, she took the stand. Her voice was steady, but her hands were visibly trembling. She pointed directly at Bundy and described the handcuffs snapping shut, the crowbar rising in the dim light of the Volkswagen, the terror of fighting for her life while he yelled at her that she was under arrest. Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler described the sounds they heard in the dark, the wet, meaty thud of the oak club coming down again and again, the smell of blood that even to that day they said made them gag. Cheryl Thomas, she could barely speak as she recounted waking up to the nightmare of her own face being destroyed. The media circus surrounding the trial was unlike anything America had ever witnessed. Quote, Ted fever had swept the country. Television cameras were everywhere. Network anchors signed off each night with updates from the Bundy trial. Outside the courthouse, vendors sold Ted Bundy for president t-shirts and buttons. Women would send him love letters from the hundreds, some proposing marriage, some offering to have his children. Fan clubs would form. Reporters would camp on the sidewalks, and they would interview anyone who would want to talk. Now, while the parents of these dead girls sat in the gallery fighting back sobs, the public would turn it into what was the hottest soap opera on television. That same disarming smile that had once lured young women to their deaths was now being broadcast into living rooms across the nation turning this serial killer into a twisted celebrity. On July 31st, 1979, the jury deliberated for less than 7 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. And Bundy's reaction? He smiled. He actually smiled. A slow, satisfied, almost amused smile. The judge sentenced him and did have some parting words for Bundy.
I'm not asking for mercy, for I find it somewhat absurd to ask for mercy for something I did not do. So I will be tortured for and will suffer for and receive the pain for that act. But I will not share the burden for the guilt.
This court, independent of, but in agreement with, the advisory sentence rendered by the jury, does hereby impose the death penalty upon the defendant, Theodore Robert Bundy. Take care of yourself, young man.
Thank you.
I say that to you sincerely. Take care of yourself. It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. You made a good lawyer. I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner.
2 sentences of death, one for each of the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy. And when that gavel came down, Bundy stood up, thanked the court with kind of a mocking politeness, and turned toward the camera with a little wave, as if he was signing autographs after a successful performance. While the families of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy left the courtroom in tears, clutching each other for support, Ted Bundy was already planning his next courtroom stunt. But it was the second trial that would be the one that finally broke him. The murder trial of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach started in Orlando on January of 1980. The courtroom was smaller than the Chi Omega Circus in Miami, but the pain inside it was somehow even more unbearable. The air was thicker, it felt heavier, as if the weight of an innocent child's death pressed down on every person that was there. The wooden benches would creak under the weight of Kimberly's family, her mother, rigid, eyes red and swollen, clutching a small stuffed animal her daughter had once loved. Her father stared at the floor, jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might shatter, and reporters were there, but they were quieter now. Even the media sensed this one was different. This wasn't about a sorority house bloodbath. This was about a little girl who was stolen from her school in broad daylight. And Ted Bundy once again chose to represent himself. He sat at the defense table in the same carefully pressed suit, hair still perfectly combed, same handsome face turned toward the jury, but something had shifted. The cocky charm that had carried him through that first trial looked like it was starting to crack. He still argued every point, still cross-examined witnesses with flair, still treated the courtroom like his personal stage. But the evidence was closing in like a noose, and the prosecution laid out the case with precision. They showed the jury the exact spot outside Lake City Junior High where Kimberly had last been seen, the same sidewalk where she had waved to friends just moments before climbing into that white Dodge van. They presented fibers from the van that matched fibers found on Kimberly's clothing. They introduced bite mark evidence and bloodstains, and most heartbreaking of all, they called the searchers who had finally found her tiny body in those remote woods near that old pig pen to the stand. The medical examiner described injuries in clinical detail, the blunt force trauma to her skull, the signs of sexual assault so savage that even hardened detectives had wept when they saw the photos. The gallery wept openly. Mothers covered their mouths and fathers looked like they might lunge across the room. But Bundy never flinched. He objected, he smirked, he tried to charm the female jurors with that same smile, and even when the judge warned him, even when the evidence painted an unmistakable picture of a monster raping and murdering a child, Bundy kept performing, as if this were some elaborate game that he could win with the right legal maneuver or the right wink at the right moment. And on February 12th of 1980, the jury took less than 2 hours to reach a guilty verdict. When the foreman read the words "guilty of first-degree murder," a sound moved through the courtroom that no one there will ever forget. A collective broken sob from Kimberly's family that seemed to rise to the very depths of human grief. Her mother would collapse against her husband. Her father let out a low animal sound of pure agony. The relief was there, but it was buried under years of unimaginable pain. And then came the sentencing. Bundy stood up one last time, still trying to control the narrative. He made a rambling, self-serving statement about the fairness of the trial and about how the system had failed him and about how he was the real victim of circumstance. And the judge, a man who had sat through every horrifying detail, looked at him with cold disgust and pronounced the sentence: death by electric chair. Bundy didn't cry. He didn't beg. He simply smiled that same empty, chilling smile and said, "Thank you, Your Honor," as if he had just been handed a parking ticket instead of a death warrant for the rape and murder of a child. The families of his victims had justice, though it was impossible to gain closure. 2 death sentences for the Chi Omega murders and another for Kimberly Leach. Multiple death warrants now hung over his head, and the state of Florida had made it clear Ted Bundy would die in the electric chair. But even then, the monster wasn't finished fighting. He would spend the next 9 years on death row, filing appeal after appeal, granting interviews, manipulating the media, and refusing to show even 1 ounce of genuine regret, while the parents of his victims aged under the weight of their grief, while survivors woke up screaming from nightmares that never fully left them. Ted Bundy sat in a climate-controlled cell, eating prison food, reading law books, and still believing he could somehow beat the system one last time. Death row would become his last stage, his final act of manipulation. 9 long years after that final death sentence was handed down in the Kimberly Leach trial, those appeals finally ran out. Ted Bundy had spent the last decade on death row at Florida State Prison, manipulating everyone around him until the very end. He granted interviews to journalists. He would dangle the promise of more confessions in exchange for delays. And he even married a woman who had fallen in love with him years prior. He fathered a child with that woman while behind bars, as crazy as that sounds. He would file appeal after appeal, each one buying him a little more time in his climate-controlled cell, eating prison food, reading law books, and still believing, right up to the last possible second, that his charm might save him. But it didn't. And I'm going to deviate for just 1 second because it probably shocked you to hear just now that Ted Bundy got married and had a child in prison. And you may want to hear that story. So I'm going to tell you about Carol Boone, who he would marry while being in prison. So Bundy had actually known Carol Boone for 5 years prior to his arrest. They had met while working together for the Department of Emergency Services in Olympia, Washington. They became fast friends. They stayed in touch. And even though he was arrested for these murders, Boone would say in interviews during his trial, she did not believe Bundy was a killer, even though obviously the evidence was overwhelming. Well, at the point of his arrest, they wanted to get married, but no one would agree to marry them because everyone knew that Bundy was a psychotic killer, except apparently Boone. So Bundy, despite being a cold-blooded killer, he was also extremely smart, and he comes up with a plan. He hires a notary to sit in the courtroom during his trial. Then, because he was representing himself, he calls Carol Boone to the stand under the pretense of being a character witness. And while Carol Boone is on the stand, he asked this. And listen closely because, it's 70s TV.
Carol, do you want to marry me?
Yes.
And I want to marry you?
Yes.
And I do want to marry you.
You said you did.
Those vows were exchanged in front of a notary and a judge. Under Florida law, the marriage is actually legal and binding, even though the judge was not aware of it. Now, they had also had a daughter together, which conjugal visits, they're not allowed in the state of Florida, But according to Carol Boone, the guards would look the other way and allow it in those days as it pertained to Bundy. So Carol and Ted, they have a daughter. They named the daughter Rose, and as the story is told, Ted and Carol were married until 1986 when Bundy confessed to Carol he did indeed commit these murders, and when she learns that, they never spoke or saw each other again. And where is she today? Well, there are theories, of course, as to what exactly happened to Rose, the daughter. She would be in her 40s now, how she spent her youth, where she went to school, what kinds of friends she made, or what she does for a living. All of that has remained a mystery for obvious reasons. As Ted Bundy's child, chances are high that Rose purposely maintains a low profile. Now, some speculate she changed her name and is living in Oklahoma as one Abigail Griffin, but nobody knows for sure. Now, as for Carol Boone, she died in 2018 in a retirement home in Seattle, Washington. I wanted to deviate and give you that bit of information, but we will move on. And Bundy, he conducted one final interview in an attempt to stay his execution just 2 days from the date, and it was with Dr. Dobson, his longtime psychiatrist, and it may be the most telling interview of all. Very interesting, especially his ability to manipulate. I found it so interesting, as a matter of fact, that at the end of this episode, I included it so you can hear it the same way I did. So if you're interested in that, listen after I wrap this one up. But we'll get back to it. On the morning of January 24th, 1989, the sun rises over Stark, Florida, and outside the prison walls, a circus had gathered. Vendors sold, quote, "Burn, Bundy, burn" t-shirts and hot dogs to cheering crowds. Hundreds of people held signs and candles, some laughing, some crying, some simply standing in silent vigil for their daughters, sisters, or friends who would never come home. Inside the prison, the atmosphere much quieter, heavier, almost clinical. Guards moved with purpose. The electric chair, known as Old Sparky, waited in a small, brightly lit execution chamber, its wooden arms worn smooth by the hands of previous condemned men, and its leather straps cracked and stained. At 7 o'clock a.m., Ted Bundy was led to that chamber. His last meal consisted of medium rare steak, eggs over easy, hash browns, toast with butter, jelly, milk, coffee, and juice. He had spent the night writing letters and making last-minute phone calls, still trying to control the narrative, even as that clock ticked down. And when the guards strapped him into the chair, thick leather belts across his chest, arms, and legs, that metal helmet lowered onto his shaved head, a black hood pulled over his face, he finally spoke. His last words were calm, almost polite. Quote, "I'd like to give my love to my family and friends," unquote. No apology, no confession of the full truth, no acknowledgement of the 30-plus young women whose lives he had stolen, the families he had shattered, the little girl he had taken from the schoolyard. Just one final empty performance for the cameras he knew were waiting outside. And at 7:06 a.m., the switch was thrown. 2,000 volts surged through his body. His muscles locked, his fists clenched so tightly the knuckles turned white beneath the straps. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the helmet. The smell of burning flesh and ozone filled the small room. His body would jerk violently once, twice, and then still. The doctors confirmed it at 7:16 a.m. Theodore Robert Bundy was dead. Outside the prison walls, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Fireworks cracked in the distance. Strangers would hug each other. Some victims' families wept with a mixture of relief and exhaustion that no words can properly capture. For the first time in 15 years, the long nightmare that had begun with Karen Sparks in that Seattle basement seemed at last to be over. And this is where the story doesn't really end. Because the evil Ted Bundy left behind, it didn't die with him in that electric chair. It lives on in the survivors who still wake up screaming from nightmares of a polite stranger with an arm in a sling. It lives in the parents who buried their daughters and never got to see them graduate, get married, or hold their own children. It lives in communities that still lock their doors at night because one man proved that evil can wear the perfect smile and knock on your door at any hour. It lives in the way we teach our children now. Stranger danger wasn't just a slogan. It was born from the terror Bundy spread from coast to coast. His crimes changed everything. Law enforcement created the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program because the fragmented jurisdiction by jurisdiction chaos that let him kill across state lines for years could never be allowed to happen again. Missing persons reports began to be taken seriously. Bite mark evidence became admissible in court. The public finally learned that the clean-cut, charming man next door could be far more dangerous than the shadowy figure lurking in an alley. Bundy didn't just murder women. He murdered trust itself. He taught an entire generation that appearances can lie, that politeness can be a weapon, and that the most terrifying monsters, well, they don't look like monsters at all. He took more than 30 young lives. No one knows the real number, but experts say it could be upwards of 100. He stole futures that can never be replaced. He left scars on families that will never fully heal. And even in death, his evil lingers. A warning etched into the history of crime. A reminder that darkness doesn't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes it walks right up to you in broad daylight, smiles, and asks for help. And that is the last, most terrifying shade of evil that Ted Bundy ever showed us. So there you have it. And if you'd like to listen further to the final interview from Ted Bundy, I've included it right after this podcast, so don't go anywhere. For everyone else, thanks so much for listening to this episode of 50 Shades of Evil. I am Jim Chapman. Much love.
Ted, it is about 2:30 in the afternoon. You are scheduled to be executed tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock if you don't receive another stay. What is going through your mind? What thoughts have you had in these last few days?
Well, I won't kid you to say that it's something that I feel that I am in control of or something that I've come to terms with, because I haven't. It's a moment-by-moment thing. Sometimes I feel very tranquil, and other times I don't feel tranquil at all. What's going through my mind right now is to use the minutes and hours that I have left as fruitfully as possible and see what happens. It helps to live in the moment in the essence that we use it productively. So right now I'm feeling calm, and in large part because I'm here with you.
For the record, you are guilty of killing many women and girls. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Ted, how did it happen? Take me back. What are the antecedents of the behavior that we've seen? So much grief, so much sorrow, so much pain for so many people. Where did it start? How did this moment come about?
That's the question of the hour, and one that not only people much more intelligent than I have been working on for years, but one that I've been working on for years and trying to understand. Is there enough time to explain it all? I don't know. I think I understand it, though. Understand what happened to me, to the extent that I can see how certain feelings and ideas developed in me to the point where I began to act out on them. Certain very violent and very destructive feelings.
All right, let's go back then to those roots. First of all, you, as I understand it, were raised in what you consider to have been a healthy home.
Absolutely.
You were not physically abused. You were not sexually abused. You were not emotionally abused.
No, no way. And that's part of the tragedy of this whole situation, is because I grew up in a wonderful home with two dedicated and loving parents, one of 5 brothers and sisters. A home where we as children were the focus of my parents' lives, where we regularly attended church, 2 Christian parents who did not drink, they did not smoke, there was no gambling, there was no physical abuse or fighting in the home. I'm not saying this was Leave It to Beaver.
It wasn't a perfect home.
Well, no, I don't know that such a home exists, but it was a fine, solid Christian home, and nobody, I hope no one will try to take the easy way out and to try to blame or otherwise accuse my family of contributing to this, because I know, and I'm trying to tell you as honestly as I know what happened, and I think this is a message I want to get across. But as a young boy, and I mean a boy of 12 or 13, certainly, that I encountered outside the home again, in the local grocery store, the local drugstore, the softcore pornography, what people call softcore. But as I think I explained to you last night, Dr. Dobson, in an anecdote, as young boys do, we explored the back roads and sideways and byways of our neighborhood, and oftentimes people would dump the garbage and whatever they were cleaning out of their house, and from time to time we'd come across pornographic books of a harder nature than more graphic, you might say, more explicit nature than we would encounter, let's say, in your local grocery store. And this also included such things as, let's say, detective magazines and more hardcore.
Those that involve violence.
Yes, yes, yeah. And this is something I think I want to emphasize, is the most damaging kinds of pornography. And again, I'm talking from personal experience. Hard, real, personal experience. The most damaging kinds of pornography are those that involve violence and sexual violence, because the wedding of those two forces, as I know only too well, brings about behavior that is just too terrible to describe.
Now, walk me through that. What was going on in your mind at that time?
Okay, before we go any further, I think it's important to me, and the people believe what I'm saying, to tell you that I'm not blaming pornography and not saying that it caused me to go out and do certain things. And I take full responsibility for whatever I've done and all the things that I've done. That's not the question here. The question and the issue is how this kind of literature contributed and helped mold and shape the kinds of violent behavior.
It fueled your fantasies, didn't it?
Well, in the beginning, it fuels this kind of thought process. Then, at a certain time, it's instrumental in what I would say crystallizing it, making it into something which is almost like a separate entity inside. And at that point, you're at the verge, or I was at the verge of acting out on these kinds of thoughts.
Now, I really want to understand that. You had gone about as far as you could go in your own fantasy life with printed material, and you made or printed and video or film
photos, magazines, what have you. Yeah.
And then there was the urge to take that little step or big step over to a physical event.
And it happened in stages, gradually. It doesn't necessarily, not to me at least, happen overnight. My experience with, I'd say, pornography generally, but with pornography that deals on a violent level with sexuality, is that once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like other kinds of addiction, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it.
How long did you stay at that point before you actually assaulted someone?
Well, yeah, you see, that is a very delicate point in my own development, and we're talking about having reached the point or a gray area that surrounded that point over a course
You don't remember
of years.
how long that
was?
was?
I would say a couple years. And what I was dealing with there were very strong inhibitions against criminal behavior or violent behavior that had been conditioned into me, bred into me in my environment, in my neighborhood, in my church, in my school. Things which said, no, this is wrong. Even to think of it is wrong, but certainly to do it is wrong. And I'm on that edge, and you might say the last vestiges of restraint, the barriers to actually doing something were being tested constantly and assailed through the kind of fantasy life that was fueled largely by pornography.
Do you remember what pushed you over that edge? Do you remember the decision to go for it? Do you remember where you decided to throw caution to the wind?
Again, when you say pushed, I know what you're saying. I don't want to infer again.
I understand that.
That I was some helpless kind of a victim, and yet we're talking about an influence that is the influence of violent types of media and violent pornography, which was an indispensable link in the chain of behavior, the chain of events that led to the behaviors, to the assaults, to the murders, and what have you. It's a very difficult thing to describe. The sensation of reaching that point where I knew that it was like something had, say, snapped, that I knew that I couldn't control it anymore, that these barriers that I had learned as a child, that had been instilled in me, were not enough to hold me back with respect to seeking out and harming somebody.
Would it be accurate to call that a frenzy, a sexual frenzy?
Well, yes, that's one way to describe it. A compulsion, a building up of this destructive energy. Another factor here that I haven't mentioned is the use of alcohol. But I think that what alcohol did, in conjunction with, let's say, my exposure to pornography, was alcohol reduced my inhibitions. At the same time, the fantasy life that was fueled by pornography eroded them further.
In the early days, you were nearly always about half drunk when you did these things. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Was that always true?
I would say that was generally the case, almost without exception.
All right, if I can understand it now, there's this battle going on within. There are the conventions that you've been taught. There's the right and wrong that you learned as a child. Mm-hmm. And then there is this unbridled passion fueled by your plunge into hardcore violent pornography. And those things are at war with each other.
Yes.
And then with the alcohol diminishing the inhibitions, you let go.
Well, yes, and you can summarize it that way, and that's accurate, certainly. And it just occurred to me that some people would say that, well, I've seen that stuff and it doesn't do anything to me. And I can understand that. Virtually everyone can be exposed to so-called pornography, and while they're aroused to it to one degree or another, not go out and do anything wrong.
Addictions are like that. They affect some people more than they affect others. Well, but there is a percentage of people affected by hardcore pornography in a very violent way, and you're obviously one of them.
That was a major component, and I don't know why I was vulnerable to it. All I know is that it had an impact on me that was just so central to the development of the violent behavior that I engaged in.
Ted, after you committed your first murder, what was the emotional effect on you? What happened in the days after that?
Well, again, please understand that even all these years later, it's very difficult to talk about it, and reliving it through talking about it is difficult to say the least, but I want you to understand what happened. It was like coming out of some kind of horrible trance or dream. I can only liken it to after, I don't want to over-dramatize it, but to have been possessed by something so awful and so alien, and then the next morning wake up from it, remember what happened, and realize that basically, in the eyes of the law, certainly in the eyes of God, you're responsible. To wake up in the morning and realize what I had done, and with a clear mind and all my essential moral and ethical feelings intact at that moment, absolutely horrified that I was capable of doing something like that.
You really hadn't known that before?
There is just absolutely no way to describe, first, the brutal urge to do that kind of thing, and then what happens is once it has been more or less satisfied and recedes, you might say, or spent, that sense, that kind of energy level recedes, and basically I became myself again. I want people to understand this too, and I'm not saying this gratuitously because it's important that people understand this, that basically I was a normal person. I wasn't some guy hanging out at bars or a bum, or I wasn't a pervert in the sense that, people look at somebody and say, I know there's something wrong with him, and just tell. I was essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life, except for this one small but very potent and very destructive segment of it that I kept very secret and very close to myself and didn't let anybody know about it. And part of the shock and horror for my dear friends and family years ago when I was first arrested was that there was no clue. They looked at me and they looked at the all-American boy, and I wasn't perfect, but I want to be quite candid with you. I was okay. I was. The basic humanity and basic spirit that God gave me was intact, but unfortunately it became overwhelmed at times. And I think people need to recognize that it's not some kind of those of us who have been so much influenced by violence in the media, in particular pornographic violence, are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands. And we grew up in regular families. And pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today. It snatched me out of my home. It snatched me out of my home 20, 30 years ago. And as diligent as my parents were, and they were diligent in protecting their children, and as good a Christian home as we had, and we had a wonderful Christian home, there is no protection against the kinds of influences that are loose in a society that tolerates.
You feel this really deeply, don't you? Ted, outside these walls right now, there are several hundred reporters that wanted to talk to you.
Yeah.
And you asked me to come here from California because you had something you wanted to say. This hour that we have together is not just an interview with a man who's scheduled to die tomorrow morning. I am here And you're here because of this message that you're talking about right here. You really feel that hardcore pornography and the doorway to it, softcore pornography, is doing untold damage to other people and causing other women to be abused and killed the way you did others.
Listen, I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean, I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this. But I've lived in prison for a long time now. And I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography. There's no question about it. The FBI's own study on serial homicide shows that the most common interest among serial killers is pornography.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's real. It's true.
Ted, what would your life have been like without that influence? You can only speculate.
Yeah. Well, I know it would have been far better, not just for me, and it's, excuse me for being so self-centered here. It would have been a lot better for me and lots of other people. I know that, lots of other innocent people, victims and families. It would have been a lot better. There's no question, but that it would have been a fuller life. Certainly a life that would not have involved, I'm absolutely certain, would not have involved this kind of violence that I have committed.
I'm sure, Ted, if I were able to ask you the questions that are being asked out there, one of the most important as you come down to perhaps your final hours, are you thinking about all those victims out there and their families who are so wounded, years later, their lives have not returned to normal. They will never return to normal.
Absolutely.
Are you carrying that load, that weight? Is the remorse there?
Again, I know that people will accuse me of being self-serving, but we're beyond that now. I mean, I'm just telling you how I feel. But through God's help, I have been able to come to the point where much too late, but better late than never, feel the hurt and the pain that I am responsible for. Yes, absolutely. In the past few days, myself and a number of investigators have been talking about unsolved cases, murders that I was involved in. And it's hard to talk about all these years later because it revives in me all those terrible feelings and those thoughts that I have steadfastly and diligently dealt with, and I think successfully, with the love of God. And yet it's reopened that, and I felt the pain and I felt the horror again of all that. And I can only hope that those who I have harmed, those who I've caused so much grief, even if they don't believe my expression of sorrow and remorse, will believe what I'm saying now, that there is loose in their towns and their communities people like me today whose dangerous impulses are being fueled day in and day out by violence in the media in its various forms, particularly sexualized violence. And what scares me, and let's come into the present now, because what I'm talking about happened 20, 30 years ago, that is, in my formative stages. And what scares and appalls me, Dr. Dobson, is when I see what's on cable TV, some of the movies, I mean, some of the violence in the movies that come into homes today with stuff that they wouldn't show in X-rated adult theaters 30 years ago. This stuff...
The slasher movies that you're talking about.
That stuff is, I'm telling you, from personal experience, the most, that is graphic violence on screen, particularly as it gets into the home to children who may be unattended or unaware that they may be a Ted Bundy who has that vulnerability to that predisposition to be influenced by that kind of behavior, by that kind of movie, that kind of violence. There are kids sitting out there switching the TV dial around and come upon these movies late at night, or I don't know when they're on, but they're on and any kid can watch them. It's scary when I think what would have happened to me if I had seen. I mean, scary enough. I mean, that I just ran into stuff outside the home, but to know that children are watching that kind of thing today, or can pick up their phone and dial away for it or send away for it.
Can you help me understand this desensitization process that took place? What was going on in your mind?
Well, by desensitization, I describe it in specific terms is that each time I'd harm someone, each time I'd kill someone, there'd be an enormous amount, especially at first, enormous amount of horror, guilt, remorse afterwards. But then that impulse to do it again would come back even stronger. Now, believe me, I didn't. The unique thing about how this worked, Dr. Dobson, is that I still felt in my regular life the full range of guilt and remorse about other things, regret and...
but you had this compartmentalized...
This compartmentalized, very well-focused, very sharply focused area where it was like a black hole. It was like a, like a crack, and everything that fell into that crack just disappeared. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. One of the final murders that you committed, of course, was apparently little Kimberly Leach, 12 years of age. I think the public outcry is greater there because an innocent child was taken from a playground. What did you feel after that? Were there the normal emotions 3 days later? Where were you, Ted?
I can't really talk about that right now. That's
too painful.
I would like to be able to convey to you what that experience is like, but I can't. I won't be able to talk about that.
Okay.
I can't begin to understand. Well, I can try, but I'm aware that I can't begin to understand the pain that the parents of these children that I have, and these young women that I have harmed, feel. And I can't restore really much to them, if anything. I won't pretend to, and I don't even expect them to forgive me, and I'm not asking for it. That kind of forgiveness is of God, and if they have it, they have it. If they don't, well, maybe they'll find it someday.
Do you deserve the punishment the state has inflicted upon you?
That's a very good question, and I'll answer very, very honestly. I don't want to die. I'm not going to kid you. I'll kid you not. I deserve certainly the most extreme punishment society has, and I think society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me. That's for sure. I think what I hope will come of our discussion is I think society deserves to be protected from itself, because as we've been talking, there are forces at loose in this country, particularly, again, this kind of violent pornography, where, on the one hand, well-meaning, decent people will condemn behavior of a Ted Bundy while they're walking past a magazine rack full of the very kinds of things that send young kids down the road to be Ted Bundys. That's the irony. We're talking here not just about more. What I'm talking about is going beyond retribution, which is what people want with me, going beyond retribution and punishment, because there is no way in the world that killing me is going to restore those beautiful children to their parents and correct and soothe the pain. But I'll tell you, there are lots of other kids playing in streets around this country today who are going to be dead tomorrow and the next day and the next day and next month, because other young people are reading the kinds of things and seeing the kinds of things that are available in the media today.
Ted, as you would imagine, there's tremendous cynicism about you on the outside, and I suppose for good reason. I'm not sure that there's anything that you could say that people would believe. Some people would believe.
Yeah.
And yet, you told me last night, and I have heard this through our mutual friend John Tanner, that you have accepted the forgiveness of Jesus Christ and are a follower and a believer in Him. Do you draw strength from that as you approach these final hours?
I do. I can't say that
It's going to be
being
easy.
in the valley of the shadow of death is something that I've become all that accustomed to, and that I'm strong and nothing's bothering me. Listen, it's no fun. It gets kind of lonely, and yet I have to remind myself that every one of us will go through this someday, in one way or another,
appointed unto man.
and countless millions who have walked this earth before us have. So this is just an experience which we all share, and
Yeah.
right on.